think one of the reviews commented, "Everybody says shalom." Someone said something snarky about how, no, not everyone says shalom. So I do want to say that in the original prose version, I actually did have an Arab shopkeeper who said salam alaikum, but obviously it couldn't rhyme with that, so it got lost.
This is the Book of Life. I'm Heidi Rabinowitz. Leslie Kimmelman is a prolific author of Jewish and secular children's books. She won a Sidney Taylor Honor Award for her picture book Everybody Says Shalom, and I recorded the presentation she gave about it at the Association of Jewish Libraries Conference in Charleston, South Carolina in June 2016.
So Leslie grew up outside Philadelphia and graduated from Middlebury College in Vermont. She's the author of dozens of children's picture books, both under her own name and her alias Jody Shepherd, after her dog Jody, who was part shepherd. Ms. Kimmelman has been an editor at Sesame Workshop for the last 20 years, working on books, ebooks, apps, and special projects, such as the recent Autism Initiative. She lives with her family near New York City.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I just wanted to thank the Sidney Taylor Committee because I am so thrilled that my book was recognized this way, and congratulations to everyone else who is here and not here, authors and artists. I'm especially happy to get a Sidney Taylor Award because I was completely obsessed by the All of a Kind family books when I was growing up. Despite the fact that I lived in a small town outside Philadelphia that was nothing like the Lower East Side, and despite the fact that I go back pretty far, but not quite as far as the All of a Kind family, and despite the fact that I was one of only 4 sisters, not 5, and we never got a boy, I still was just completely besotted, and I thought I should have been part of that family. And in fact, I used to give my mother tips, like, oh, we should have a May Day party, or if you really want us to clean up the house well, you should hide little buttons all around, and then that will be a good incentive, except I thought quarters would be better than buttons. I also just wanted to thank 2 people who aren't here, my editor, Naomi Feinberg at Random House, who was terrific, and the artist whose illustrations are amazing, and I think the book would have been much poorer without them, and she is happily at home with a little baby. So a lot of people ask me, why do I write so many books with Jewish content? And my reason is usually because when I was growing up, there was just nothing, and I was always looking for books with Jewish protagonists, especially picture books, and especially books with contemporary settings. And I was kind of shocked when my own children were born. I'm not going to tell you how old they are, but they're grown. That really nothing had changed, and they really couldn't find books either that spoke to the Jewish experience. So I started writing them. Luckily, that has really changed now. The kids growing up now are much luckier. But I also like to tell 2 other stories that sort of illustrate why I write children's books with Jewish topics. First one, when I was going to college, it was a very small New England college in a small New England town, and you could probably count the number of Jewish people on your 10 fingers. And my freshman year, I went on the first day of Passover to report for my job at the dining hall. And the woman who was in charge of the dining services, who was very nice, called me over excitedly at the beginning of my shift, and she said, look, I want you to see what I did. I sent all the way to New York for these. And she pointed to a row of gorgeous, golden, braided challahs. And skip forward a couple generations, my daughter going to school, and she went to Columbia in New York City, neither of which are hurting for a Jewish population. And yet, when we went to visit her at Passover, we went to a deli across the street. A deli in New York can mean something like a sandwich shop that happens to be in New York. It really isn't a deli. But anyway, it's right across from Columbia, and the sign in the window said something like this. So, I think that was a mistake, but I don't know. Maybe they were matchmaking. I'll never know.
We have
All right,
matzah bread.
So, Everybody Says Shalom. The idea for this book started a number of years ago. I had written a book for Knopf called Everybody Bonjours about a little girl and her family going through Paris. And my friend Naomi, who was also an editor at Random House, saw it and she said, this would really work well set in Israel. You should try doing something similar in Israel. And I thought, good idea. I'm not sure how many rhymes for shalom I would come up with, but I put it down in my ideas file and then, of course, promptly forgot about it. About 2 years after that, my daughter squeezed in her last window of eligibility for a Birthright Israel trip and came home like every person I've ever heard of, completely incandescent and, totally jazzed up, and said, Mom, you should really write a book about a little girl or a little boy who visits Israel. And by the way, wouldn't it be great if you named her Lila, as in Lila Tov? So I thought, that's a cute idea. And I started to write. I finished the manuscript and it, in part, went, there was so much to see and do in Israel. Lila snorkeled in the Red Sea. Shalom foam, she exclaimed, and I don't know why shalom foam never even made it into my final book. I don't know why I wasted a good rhyme. Every night as they tucked her into bed, her parents said, Lila Tov, Lila Tov. Lila had been named for her great-grandmother Delilah, but everyone called her Lila. And as she'd known since she was very little, Lila Tov was Hebrew for good night. Lila couldn't read Hebrew letters. They looked completely different, like Lamed for El as in Lila. But in Israel, Lila learned how to say Hebrew words like Glida for ice cream and Gamal for camel, Bavakasha and Todah for please and thank you, and Sababa for cool. Speaking Hebrew was very Sababa, and on and on. And I finished and I sent it to my editor, and she really liked it. But she had a bunch of revisions, and by the way, had I thought about writing it in verse. So I ignored her, and I did a revision, and she liked that one too, but had it occurred to me that it might work really well as a poem. And this went on about, I'd say probably through 4 or 5 revisions, and finally I thought, you know what, I'm just going to write this as a poem, and I'm going to show her it doesn't work as a poem, and then we'll, move on from there. And of course I wrote it, and it did work as a poem, and it became this book. I think the biggest challenge was to get what I wanted to say in very, very few words, because it's not just a poem, it's basically 4 or 5 words a page. It's very, very brief. And I did lose a few things that I would have liked to say in an ideal world. Anyway, I think what I was trying to do in the book was to introduce Israel to the very youngest kids, removed from all the politics, which is what most people hear of Israel. And I just wanted to introduce the idea that it was this amazing country with incredible things to see and do. Hopefully I did that. There were 2 things that I thought might be interesting to talk about, 2 issues that came up. The first was how to portray the Kotel. And our first thought was, let's show the whole wall. It's enormous, it's overwhelming, it's really cool. So the artist drew a sketch. This is the wall. If you can see the note from the editor, it says, maybe focus closer. That barrier fence has to be there. Let's discuss. And then at the bottom, we've got a problem here. Sadly, there's an orange barrier between the women's and men's side of the wall. Don't get me started. So she and I both had some problems with the divided wall, and we didn't really want to show it. So we thought, well, maybe we can show just the little girl in the story putting her piece of paper into the wall, and then we sort of sidestep over the whole issue. She's putting a little piece of paper into the wall that says peace. And we liked it a lot until we realized that for kids who had never been to Israel, it doesn't really give them the sense of what the Kotel really looks like. It just shows a tiny little portion of the wall. So we moved that to the back of the book where it is now, and she did her compromise drawing. The final picture was just the women's side of the wall, which sort of showed the hugeness of the wall, but just showed one gender. So we sort of like that solution. The second issue was diversity and inclusion. I wanted to make sure to at least give homage to the fact that Israel is important not just to the Jewish people. We knew that this book would mostly probably go to Jewish children, but not exclusively, and wanted to show that it was a diverse culture. So we included minarets, we included the high temple, camels, and oceans, of course, or seas are non-denominational. And in crowd scenes, we were very careful to show the cross-section of people. So if you can see, in this crowd scene, we see some Arabic people, some Bedouins, both secular and Orthodox Jews. There are a couple soldiers in the background. And in the back of the book, where I talk about the sites, I explicitly said something to the effect of, I think it was in relation to Jerusalem, that Jerusalem is also a holy city for Muslims and Christians. And I thought that was important. I think one of the reviews commented, "Everybody says shalom." Someone said something snarky about how, no, not everyone says shalom. So I do want to say that in the original prose version, I actually did have an Arab shopkeeper who said salam alaikum, but obviously I couldn't rhyme with that, so it got lost. And that's really all I want to say, except to say this is a really fun book to use with groups because kids are so interested. There's so much you can do with Israel, making a flag crafts. I've done crafts where we have kids trace around their hand and cut it out and then decorate it like a hamsa with an eye in the middle. We've obviously had some Israeli food. And then I've played 2 games so far. Maybe I'll think of another one. The first one we do Shimon Says, and we just do sort of an Israeli version, so we have them shaking their rosh and pretending to ride on a camel and so forth. The other game I'd like to play is one where I show slides of things that you can find in either Israel or the United States. And if it's Israel, I have them say shalom, and if it's the United States, I have them call out hello or hi. So, for example, the American flag, they would say hi, shalom, and we have shalom again, and hi. And it's a nice way to introduce them to the culture. Again, really, really appreciate the award, and thank you so much.
The pictures were the American flag, the Israeli flag, the Kotel, and Mount Rushmore. Books have dedication pages, and libraries have dedication plaques. The Book of Life podcast has dedications too. Here's a dedication for our next episode.
Hi, this is Eva Wiseman, author of Another Me. I'll be joining you soon on the Book of Life podcast. I'd like to dedicate my episode to all the young readers who are interested in the supernatural and are curious to learn more about an e-book.
If you enjoy the Book of Life podcast, please become a patron at patreon.com/bookoflife. Past podcast guest April Halpern Wayland is a patron. Thank you very much, April. You can also help us by leaving a review on iTunes or a comment on our blog at bookoflifepodcast.com. Keep in touch by liking our page at facebook.com/bookoflifepodcast. Follow us on twitter.com/bookoflifepod. Email us at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 561-206-2473. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida at cbiboca.org and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilock Makers Klezmer String Band. Thanks for listening, and happy reading!